Welcome to Terrific Talk. My name is Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson.
Play to win the game. Gone.
Tom Anderson.
Great cash, homie. Great cash, homie.
I feel ready to go another 9 innings.
Touchdown!
I feel ready to go another 9 innings.
Touchdown!
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Sound goes crazy.
Terrific Talk Podcast. Welcome back, Terrific Talk Podcast.
Here comes the hose!
I'm your host, Tom Anderson.
First, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
Welcome to Terrific Talk. I'm Tom Anderson. We've got a great podcast for you today. I'm very excited to talk with our guest, Jack Curry of the Yes Network. Jack currently works as a New York Yankees studio analyst, program contributor, and also as a columnist on YesNetwork.com. Prior to joining the Yankees in 2010, Jack worked at the New York Times for nearly 20 years as a New York Yankees beat writer, and then as the newspaper's national baseball writer for 11 years. He's one of the best baseball writers in the business. He's covered 18 World Series, 11 All-Star games, 10 Major League Baseball winter meetings, 2 World Baseball Classics. He's written a book with Derek Jeter. He's done it all, and I'm very proud to have him on as my guest today. So, Jack, without further ado, thank you for coming on, and welcome to Terrific Talk.
Oh, it's good to be here, Tom, and thank you for reading off my resume there. I appreciate that.
Well, I figured I'd start the podcast today with a simple question. Why did you choose sports writing as a career?
I was in the 7th grade, and probably like most kids, I grew up in New Jersey, and I wanted to be a baseball player. But in the 7th grade, I also developed a real affinity for writing. I remember having written an essay, and some teacher complimented it and said, "You could be a writer." So I decided to combine two things that I suddenly now loved. I always loved sports, and writing became a new passion for me. So I started a school newspaper at my elementary school. I had never had one before. And I just loved the rush of writing something and having people walk through the hallways and say to you, "Hey, I read what you wrote," or "How come you wrote it this way?" And so my passion for writing started to catch up to my passion for sports. And then I was a good high school baseball player, but I wasn't good enough to probably go beyond that. I got to Fordham. I went to one baseball practice. Paul Blair, the former Yankee, was the coach. And it took about 4.5 hours. And I looked around and I said, I'm going to probably spend the next 4 years as a backup outfielder. I should really get this journalism thing going in high gear. And that's really when I started to push in that direction, working for both the school newspaper and the radio station at Fordham WFUV.
Interesting. It's obvious you love the game of baseball. What is it about the game that's so special to you?
I have an older brother who's a couple of years older than me, and I just remember being 4 or 5 years old and watching him get excited about baseball games. And when you're the younger brother, you follow your older brother's lead, and I followed his lead, and it was outside every day, wanting to play as many forms of baseball as possible. I grew up in Jersey City, so it was on the streets. It wasn't in parks, so it was wiffle ball and stickball. And I quickly grew very enamored with knowing the players. I didn't want to play a game unless I could announce the lineups of the players, too. So every team from the 70s, I don't want to challenge myself because you'll probably get me, but I was going to say if you mentioned a team from the early 70s, I could probably tell you what their lineup was because it just was something about the sport that grabbed onto me. And I like other sports, but I've never loved anything the way that I love baseball.
Now, you mentioned you're from Jersey City. You're a Jersey boy like myself. You went to Fordham. So being from the area, did you grow up as a Yankees fan?
Well, here's what's interesting is I actually grew up liking the Mets, and here's
really?
why. I was born in 1964, and as I mentioned my brother earlier, he started to become a fan right around 69. Well, the Mets just won. So what does any kid do? You're going to side with the team that just won. So it doesn't really matter, though, Tom, really, because I followed all baseball growing up, and I don't really recall myself being one of these haters. You loved one team, so you had to hate the other. And quite frankly, once you get into this business, I feel that if you're going to do the job the right way, your allegiance to any team really has to go by the wayside, and you have to be objective, and you have to talk about what you see or write about what you see. And I know there might be people who are on the radio and who have favorite teams, and they talk about it, and I know I've had this discussion with some of them, but I think those early year allegiances kind of fade away, and you try and do the job the right way, and that's what I try and do.
We're talking with Jack Curry of the Yes Network. Jack, what was your first job out of college, and what did you learn from that experience?
I worked while I was in college. I worked for the Jersey Journal in Jersey City for 3 summers, and I probably covered more Little League games than anyone would ever imagine you could cover. And the Jersey Journal is a Newhouse operation, so I was able to go from the Jersey Journal right after college to the Star-Ledger, and I worked for the Star-Ledger for a year. Only stayed there it was high school and college sports, and that's kind of what they pigeonholed you into doing. And though I liked the opportunity, I knew I had to get out because I wanted to do more than that. And so after being there for about a year, I was hired by the New York Times as a low-level clerk with the idea that, listen, we like your writing ability, but we want you to come in here, and it's going to be clerical work, and if you can figure out time to write, we'll listen to your article submissions. But I didn't get hired there as a reporter. I got hired there as a writing clerk with the opportunity to become a reporter, and fortunately for me, it worked out.
What do you think are the keys to covering a sports beat successfully?
I think you have to be just so totally aware of what's going on around you. And I think that, quite honestly, Tom, maybe 80% of the job is showing up on time. And what I mean by that is being there and being aware of what's going on around you. Now, there are going to be, on any beat, there's probably going to be 500 stories a year, and 480 of them everyone's going to get. There's going to be 20 or so stories maybe, and I'm just pulling these numbers out of my head. I haven't done any scientific evaluation of this, but my point is there's going to be a handful of stories that happen, and you want to be the one who has developed enough sources and developed enough relationships that you get some of those bigger stories because, like I said, going there every day and talking to the right people, you should be able to keep your head above water, but it's those bigger stories that you want to kind of establish yourself. And the first part that I mentioned is not always that easy. Just some people are willing to play for a tie when they're on a beat. They're there, and they want to go forward, and here's the story of the day, boom, it's done. Then there are other people who push to make it a better story or push for more information. And the thing that I feel that I was fortunate with when I started being the Yankees beat writer is the competition that I had to deal with made me a lot better. Some of the guys that were on the beat when I started on the Times beat, Michael Kay, John Heyman, Joel Sherman, these are guys who, if you look at what they've accomplished now, are big voices not only in the New York market but nationally. So competing against them and seeing how they did their job and realizing that if I don't push hard and develop relationships and sources, these guys are going to crush me. And in the beginning, you do get beat up. You miss out on stories, but you figure out a way. You watch the way other people do their jobs, and I'm sure it's like anything else. If you run a 9-minute mile and you start running with guys who run 7.5-minute miles, you're going to come closer to running a 7.5-minute mile than a 9-minute mile.
What's your favorite sports book?
Wow, that's a great question. I can't say my own because that would be rather petty. My favorite sports book? That's a great question. You know what? I remember reading. I mean, I loved Friday Night Lights. I thought that was a terrific book. I was so impressed with Bissinger's ability to get himself so involved in that subject and tell you a lot about. I mean, I didn't really know that all that much about high school football in Texas. So, off the top of my head, I mean, I'm sure there are baseball books that stand out too. Off the top of my head, that is one that stands out. The Roberto Clemente biography, which also really went very, very deep into Clemente's life and told you there's no way that he should have been anywhere near that plane for the Nicaraguan charity mission that he ended up going on. That was another great book. I love the Mickey Mantle book that Jane Levy did in the past few years. Again, I read books, and great writing is tremendous, but I think I almost have more of a feeling of praise when their reporting stands out in a book because you say, wow, how in the world did they ever get that? And so those are a few of the ones that stand out for me.
Cool. Interesting. All right, let's talk some Yankees. Now, you recently broke the news that Andy Pettitte was returning to the Yankees. What was your immediate reaction to that news when you first discovered he was returning?
Well, when you discover something like that, Tom, the first thing you want to do is get a second source, because it really did come out of left field. And Andy Pettitte had been to camp a few weeks earlier, and I don't want to say I was suspicious about him, but the germ of the story kind of does begin there, because I've covered Andy since his rookie season, and I know him pretty well. I interviewed his father, I interviewed people around him for a long time. And his answers that day to a group of us about whether or not being around the team kind of gave him an itch or an ache to be back, he didn't give you one of those flat-out no ways. He kind of left the door open a crack that, you know what, when you are here, you do feel it. He said, I look at Mariano Rivera, and he's 42, and I'm only 39, and I say to myself, could I do this? But then I look at the reason I did retire, and that was my family, so I got to remember that. But I just remember putting that in the back of my mind and saying, I wonder. But you also look at the Yankees pitching situation. You would argue that they really didn't have a spot for him. They already had 6 starters in 5 spots.
Right.
But I think what happened with the Yankees, which we found in retrospect, is that the dialogue between Brian Cashman and Andy Pettitte continued. And from a Yankee perspective, if you could get Andy Pettitte, and it's going to cost you $2.5 million, you'll figure out the rest of the rotation. He's worth it. He's a lefty at Yankee Stadium. He has postseason experience that no one on the staff has. And so it really was something that it came together kind of quickly on the reporting side of it, even though from the Yankee Pettitte side of it, it had been brewing for a few months.
When do you think Andy will actually make it up to the big leagues and pitch for the Yankees this season? Any idea?
Yeah, Tom, I'm looking at May 1st. I think that's the date that the Yankees have kind of loosely tossed around. Pettitte has said the same thing. I actually think that Pettitte is probably a little bit ahead of that and could come a little earlier. But I think the Yankees look at this and say, let's not rush him. The last time he pitched in the major leagues was 2010. He only threw about 130 innings that year, missing the first month of the season, kind of gradually getting his way back. That's the smartest move. There's no reason to rush this guy. It also gives Brian Cashman and Joe Girardi and the entire organization a chance to evaluate the pitchers that they have right now. And if Cashman thinks that the best move for the team is he's got to set someone loose, he's got time to do that. Say he decides he wants to trade Freddie Garcia because Garcia is not going to end up being a pitcher who can pitch out of the bullpen. Well, he's not. He doesn't have to force himself to do that. He doesn't have to do that in the first week of the season. He can bide himself a little bit of time.
Now, the Yanks and Seattle Mariners obviously made a huge trade this winter, with New York parting ways with their best prospect, Jesus Montero, in exchange for a very talented, hard-throwing 23-year-old starting pitcher, Michael Pineda. What do you like about Pineda, and where do you think he fits into this Yankees rotation this season?
Tom, eventually, I think Pineda is a number 2 type starter, but even the Yankees will say they don't know when that's going to happen. I love Montero as a hitter. I loved his opposite field power. And like the Yankees and the scouts who have seen him a lot more than me, I do think this guy is going to be a 30-plus home run hitter in the major leagues. However, I do think that pitching is more of a precious commodity than hitting. And if you can get a very good young pitcher, but you have to give up a very good young hitter, I think most scouts and GMs and executives would tell you, make that deal. A lot of noise this spring about Pineda's velocity. It wasn't there early. His last start of the spring, actually yesterday on Sunday, he hit about 94. I've asked tons of